Great. All right, let's get this screen shared. And I think we should be all set. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, great to be here. My name is Brian Cook, and my little presentation here is about sea level rise, specifically in Tampa Bay. Done quite a lot of work with City of Tampa and some neighboring communities. So talk about Tampa Bay specifically and sea level rise and what's going on. A little bit of a recap here. So that's me. I'm a landscape architect and urban designer. I'm at Applied Sciences. Applied Sciences, kind of a integrated interdisciplinary office founded on watershed management and water systems, doing watershed planning, urban planning, resilience, civil and site design, and landscape architecture. And we are located primary office here in Tampa, right there at the mouth of the river. So just some qualifications, some things I've worked on in the past, and I'll be going mostly over some of these that are in the Tampa Bay area. So I thought I'd first start with a little bit of perspective, just like to kind of set this out, lay this out from the outset. So little history of sea level rise. So sea level has kind of operated like a heartbeat throughout the history of our world, going rising and falling. Um, and what's kind of interesting is that in recent years, if you look at kind of the most recent large fluctuation, um, with the last the with the last major glacial melt, or sorry, the glaciation, the water was about 400 feet lower than where it is today, and that's really shows up in the geology and geography. So for those people that understand, like the west side of Florida, we have our major the shelf that's off the coast of Florida. That's those topographic differences are made up from different epochs of sea level and its elevation. We had some increase in sea level to where it is now, and then for the last 7,000 years or so, it's been fairly static, and that's as we've developed more urban areas, industrialization, all of that. So we've kind of been ingrained with this idea of a static coastline because there's only been 1 to 2 inches of rise per century over the last 7,000 years. But all that's changing. Humans have changed their environment, and that is there's a lot of science that goes into documenting all of that. If you haven't read um, the regional climate science advisory panel report from 2019, that's a great one. Probably on the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council's website. Maybe Carol will allude to that one, but that explains a lot of the science. I'm just going to give you numbers and then kind of get into some of the projects and things that are going on. So um, you can see, right, there's different projections, different scenarios involved with uh, the sea levels and how we think about those going forward. It's a quite a large discrepancy or difference in those sea levels as we get further into the future. So a little bit tough for planning, um, but but we are noticing those differences. It's about 2 to 4 inches per decade lately, and this is all shown on the tide gauges. So um, what is being done about sea level rise in Tampa Bay? I thought for this also kind of take a step back and go to 2015, because I think that's when there was a real shift in the thinking about our coasts and about sea level rise. At that point, the state legislature passed Senate Bill 1094, which was a parallel flood that all communities had to address sea level rise in their comprehensive plans. So a first there. And so that was introduced into policy, people starting to kind of they're having to address that. And then in 2017, we got a big shock to the system. And this is hurricanes, but I think it got people to really think about vulnerability, about issues of resilience. That I think, what was it? If you add this all up in 2017, just these three storms are $336 billion worth of damage. So a big shock to the system. People starting to think about resilience, and then coupled with uh, also noticing and starting to think about sea level rise. This is all starting to activate uh, uh, different communities towards thinking about these issues. So, as part of that, in 2017, Hillsborough County initiated their community vulnerability study, which was a really big project. It was between Hillsborough County and University of South Florida. And through that project, the project took on multiple aspects of resilience and emergency management. It was addressing the peril of flood, so it was taking care of that statute and dealing with sea level rise and flooding issues, but also aspects of emergency management. And before there was, say, some of the programs that are going on now, the local mitigation strategies, where these are the hazard mitigation documents that are developed by counties, where they had to identify their vulnerabilities and then address those and create projects around them. So the local mitigation strategy has always been this really strong element, kind of free resilience, before that term became so popular, I guess. But the local mitigation strategy was this tool to identify vulnerabilities and then to figure out how to address them. And so, as part of our project in 2017, 2020, sea level rise was introduced as one of those vulnerabilities, and then we had to address how to do that. And so that was a big project in sort of an academic way, through the university, that was taken on through research and studying, um, but also through the county administratively creating new policies and thinking about how to address sea level rise along with other vulnerabilities. And so that created maps like this, which identified focus areas within the community to address certain issues associated with sea level rise. So kind of a first, at least for Hillsborough County, and that included City of Tampa. So that was an important project. Going a little bit further, right, it starts to get into the consciousness around our region. And in 2019, City of Tampa conducted their most recent stormwater master plan for the Lower Peninsula area. And what was interesting about this study was it was the first time that in a stormwater study in City of Tampa, they used future conditions. They used elevated tailwater conditions to create the scenarios, the flood modeling, in order to then create the projects and identify flood vulnerabilities and create those projects to address them. So, and this was the last one that the city did. And so, yeah, important. And that is the first one considering sea level rise in stormwater management. So then in 2020, right, consciousness is still growing. I worked with City of Tampa. We wrote a grant and did a regulatory approach to sea level rise. So this was a study about what other cities and counties were doing about sea level rise. We created this big matrix, um, went through different options. We created an illustrated guide for how to address sea level rise, and the different issues around it, mostly from a policy perspective. And out of that study, a few of the main takeaways, there were like about 10 or so, but I'd say some of the main ones are that through policy, that cities and counties should be considering the future conditions in design. And this kind of extended to, say, architects, and you're creating a home or something with a 30-year mortgage, that maybe it's important to consider those future conditions so that we're ensuring longevity in projects. To promote flexibility, I talked about that big difference in the future scenarios, anywhere from 1 to 7 feet. So that variation, I think, when you start to really think about design and planning, it starts to point to the need to promote flexibility in design and not be so rigid with building structures and urban development right to the maximum or to the edges. So that was one. Another big point is community differentiation. So thinking about that different areas within the community are going to approach the issue differently because of different capacities, whether that's economic capacity, physical capacity, whether it's dense or whether a place is spread out and less dense. That there's not a one size fits all kind of approach with this. And then along with that is like this kind of negotiation, thinking about how different communities can start to develop their own financial strategies for the future, in creating mitigation strategies. And then the last one there is reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So going forward, we have the mitigation side, right? The big picture, saving the world kind of side of things, which is the reducing greenhouse gas emissions, trying to keep the heat from rising. But then there's the more community specific things about adapting communities to sea level rise. So we have both of those sides. So the city, after creating a Resilient Tampa document, doing a greenhouse gas analysis, and June in the summer of 2023 finished, and I worked with the city on this to produce their first climate action and equity plan. And that plan was really, it covers 10 different aspects of the city and the different departments, but does take a strong focus on energy and on emissions. So thinking about energy and creating 100% clean, renewable municipal energy plan was part of that. And so there's some information in there, and that document's online if you want to check it out. In 2021, we had a major change or major boost to this type of work, and that the state governor or the governor and the state legislature created Senate Bill 1954, which initiated the Resilient Florida program. So since that time, I think the last count I heard was that $1.3 billion have been provided to cities and counties and certain organizations to either do vulnerability assessments, which is like step one to the program, or to do planning and adaptation or adaptation planning and implementation of projects to create resilience. So this program has been a huge boost to the resilience program. And so out of that, the city's really tried to use that program and to work within it and its standards. There are specific standards with the Resilient Florida program, different years and scenarios that you have to use within an analysis. So working with those standards, City of Tampa has done a few studies, starting with the vulnerability assessment, which, like I said, is step one in that Resilient Florida process. So they did a more of a technical vulnerability assessment with their wastewater treatment plant. There's one that serves all of City of Tampa, and it is located near the port near the water. So that was an important study to be accomplished. From 2023 to the present, it's just about wrapped up at Port Tampa Bay, and I've been working with Port Tampa Bay to conduct their vulnerability assessment. So that's another project. And then the city of Tampa is doing a citywide vulnerability assessment also. And so that starts to look like this, where we take sea level rise scenarios and look at how water is intruding into the communities. Also looking at rainfall and then looking at storm surge. And so what you're seeing here with different tones or different scenarios, so that we can do those assessments of what critical infrastructure and what community assets are affected by these different scenarios. So that starts to look like this, where we have these asset maps and identifying the different scenarios with the different pieces of infrastructure, and then working with the city and communicating that to yeah, to start to identify next steps and action areas, where projects may need to take place. I thought I'd show one other one here. We have City of Palmetto vulnerability assessment, where looking at street scenarios. And I think this one just was interesting. I thought I'd share because, say, Riverside Drive within that community, you can see what within these charts are the each one of these notations are actual days where the sea level has already um, broached or breached to be above the street height, um, and to create a little bit of flooding. So the tides are already starting to surpass some of the historic design elevations and causing flooding at the coast. So that already happening. I think it's kind of interesting to see that and how often. And then so this being that street that's along the waterfront, we're having to think about what's the future of that street? What's future access to these homes? What does that mean? What's the policies that are going to be involved with developing this coastal shoreline, et cetera? And so for that community, for example, there's like 4 specific areas that are where the risk is concentrated. And so we'll be applying for Resilient Florida funds to create adaptation plans for those areas. And also think about planning, like where are those safe zones? So for example, for this community in the center, there's that area that is not as vulnerable and white there. And so thinking about planning and policy about kind of planning the future city, like where is density going to be located, where are the emergency services going to be located, all of that kind of stuff. At our office, we've been involved with Shore Acres flooding. Kind of go through this quickly, but if you're aware of that one, it's a very low community in St. Petersburg, already seen sunny day flooding. And so this community is low, but it's also dense. There's not a lot of open space. So like I said, there's different approaches for different communities. In the first rounds here, we're looking at potential pumps and protection. So this is kind of an infrastructural approach to protecting this low-lying community. And through this is just one of the options. This is an ongoing kind of deliberation with the city, but this you can see the difference that projects can make between existing conditions and a design solution. I'm gonna kind of skip through this. Well, just really quickly, I worked with Eckerd College to create a sea level rise resilience plan, and what that involved was looking at a whole area. So that area circled where you have potential effect from sea level rise. You can see flooding existing currently, and that potentially as a zoned approach, delineating an area where the topography with the removal and replacement of buildings, like as a whole, like as a system, where the grades could collectively be raised and then new buildings be placed at higher elevations. So kind of an interesting approach there. And then reworking the stormwater system to a surface drainage, and then creating kind of a new vision for the campus. So interesting project there. Related to that, I advise that you all check into what Treasure Island's doing. They have a program called Elevate TI, where by the year 2100, they actually want to raise the island up to elevation 7.6 for all residential areas and elevation 5 for the road. So th through that substantial redevelopment, as you're redeveloping parcels, that they're actually going to mandate fill for the community to bring into their sites, and that they're planning on raising the island over time. So very interesting program there. And then skip through this one, but another project where infrastructure approach, where technical analysis leading to a combination of seawall and backflow prevention in your stormwater pipes, which could have prevented some of the flooding that we just saw with Idalia. So kind of I'm skipping through that one quickly. And lastly, with City of Tampa, the city's working through their coastal area action plan and really are thinking about development in the coastal high hazard area. And where can density be added and where should it not be added within the City of Tampa's coastal high hazard area? There's a lot of issues around that. And so anyway, a project that's ongoing right now in the City of Tampa. And I thought I'd leave you with this, and that it's a interesting situation we're in where you have after Hurricane Ian, blank pieces of sand for more than $4 million right at the coastal edge. And so this is a tough issue. It's going to be policy, it's going to be infrastructure, but it's not going away because with land that valuable, we're not just going to be giving it back to the sea. So here's my email address, and I'm going to sign off and hand it over to Kara.
Thanks, Brian. So I will take just a second to share my screen. My name is Kara Wood-Sarah. I am the Director of Resiliency at the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. I've been here for about 5 years. Waiting for it to show me the presentation mode. Most of my work is related to the facilitation of the Tampa Bay Regional Resiliency Coalition, which is hosted in the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. So obviously I'm going to be talking a lot about the Tampa Bay region as well, similar to Brian. But the role of the Planning Council is similar to that of the other 9 planning councils in our state. So your area is probably also covered by a planning council. We're looking at expanding conversations, making sure that these 6 counties shown on the map are able to talk to each other, share any issues that they have in common. We try to make sure that there is regional leadership, that they're all thinking about stewardship of their shared, regional assets like the Bay. We host the Agency on Bay Management. Actually just updated to the Agency on Bay and Coastal Management. So that's a really focused environmental planning committee. We also try to look at trending issues, bringing governments to the table, and then of course, more recently, looking at resiliency. We have been talking about resiliency in the Planning Council for quite a long time, but in 2018, we decided that there was a need for a stronger collaborative action around resiliency. And so we formed the Regional Resiliency Coalition. This is the second collaborative or coalition around regional resiliency in the state, following the Southeast Compacts coalition. Our coalition actually covers 7 counties. So you'll see Sarasota County is also a member of our coalition, even though they're not a member of our planning council. And to date, we have 33 governments that have joined on to our coalition and over 100 private sector partners who are working with us through our working groups, through our summit, and helping us with like workshops and just thinking about how we can connect with the private sector. So Brian mentioned briefly the sea level rise projections. I put into the chat the full document on this 2019 report that came out of the Climate Science Advisory Panel. That panel is also something modeled after the Southeast Florida Compact, where they have a sort of ad hoc group of scientists who come together to review the NOAA recommendations, or sorry, the NOAA projections, and make recommendations for their local area. So for our region, the Climate Science Advisory Panel came together in 2019, or finalized this in 2019. They recommended these 3 curves coming out of the NOAA 2017 projections. Those are the intermediate low, intermediate, and high. If you are familiar with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection's requirements around vulnerability assessments, you might notice that these are different curves than those that are prescribed in the statute. So in order to get the grant funding from FDEP, you have to look at intermediate low and intermediate high. So that's one additional curve that you would have to look at if you wanted to follow our local recommendations and meet the state requirements. So I wanted to just quickly go through some of our projects that we're working on. A lot of them are, connected or related to what Brian mentioned, but one of the big projects is our Regional Resiliency Action Plan that was adopted in 2022. It took us 2 years to develop through a really collaborative consensus building process, but it's totally voluntary. None of our member governments have to adopt this or take any of these regulations as, law, but they can use it as a tool to say, this is something that the Regional Resiliency Coalition recommends. And so that makes sense for us at our local level. In addition to having, recommendations for local action, it also has high priority regional actions that we can take together. For instance, having a regional greenhouse gas assessment, which we just started this past year. And then another action is a regional heat map. So there are actions that we can take together as a region and all benefit from. And then there are local actions that the member governments can kind of pick and choose from based on their capacity, their geography, and those types of considerations. It also is really aspirational, so it's framed around 10 goals for what we want the Tampa Bay region to look like. So having, mass transit, having affordable housing, making sure our residents are healthy and have access to healthy foods. And it integrates equity throughout the document. Another recent project was our Safe Shelter program. This is looking at how our existing shelter capacity would be impacted by sea level rise. We did find that some of our existing storm shelters would be impacted by sea level rise in 2070. And so we need to start thinking ahead about how we accommodate those capacity issues. So whether it's working with the school system or identifying facilities that aren't in the school system, like community facilities. We also worked on the Resilient Ready Tampa Bay project. Brian and his team were part of this project. We picked 3 geography types and used those sort of as models for the rest of the region. So the geography types were barrier islands, waterfront areas, and inland areas. And so we picked the city of St. Pete, Oldsmar, and the city of Tampa to work with. And we did a charrette type engagement with the stakeholders there. We also used nature-based infrastructure and some 3D visualization so that it was easy for our governments and any of the community they wanted to bring out to visualize what that could look like in the future. It did produce a technical report if you wanted to check that out. And we're still hoping to use this as a model and to continue to expand on this. And we're currently working with the city of St. Petersburg, hoping to work in the neighborhoods of Shore Acres and Coquina Key and a couple of other neighborhoods as well to do some more rapid design or really thinking about what solutions make the most sense for that geography. We also looked at how our affordable housing inventory would be impacted by sea level rise. And through this, we looked at not just subsidized housing, but also naturally occurring affordable housing. That, as the Safe Shelter program also showed, we would lose our affordable housing. We would lose some of our affordable housing inventory to sea level rise. And so we need to take that into account when we're already looking at an affordability crisis. What does that continue to look like when sea level rise also exacerbates that issue? Our shorelines policy guide and model language recommends a minimum uniform height of 5 feet for all tidal flood barriers in our region. And those are hardened seawalls, but it also includes hybrid shorelines or living shorelines as well. And that 5 feet was based on a projection of sea level rise plus high tide flooding. So this could be adopted into any of the local codes. We haven't seen an adoption locally yet. There's a lot of interest, and we're going to hopefully do some more outreach throughout the rest of this year. We have heard that the city of St. Augustine is looking at adopting something similar, and it's modeled after an ordinance that was adopted in Broward County. So one other project that we completed since the last webinar a year ago was our Tampa Bay Regional Inundation Coordination Project, where we looked at how our member governments could meet the requirements of the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, their standards for conducting vulnerability assessments. So we produced GIS products for all of the flood types that the statute requires. So sea level rise, precipitation was something that we identified as a gap. And then tidal flooding was also a gap. So one of the ways that we're looking at those gaps is we have started to produce high tide flooding data for our region, the 7 counties. And we're hoping that will be done by June 1st. So if you're looking for that data, look out for that on June 1st. And then our precipitation gap is hopefully being fulfilled through a statewide project that's funded by CDBG mitigation funds, but I'm not sure of the timeline of that output. We do have an exciting project that hasn't been funded yet, a coastal master plan modeled after the statewide master plan in Louisiana. And so that would look at compound flooding for our entire region and identify some regional projects. So maybe projects that wouldn't just be located in Citrus County or Hernando County, but they would serve both counties. They would reduce flooding and also hopefully allow for some environmental, rewilding or natural-based solutions. And that's it for me. I did want to put in a plug. If you are interested in the work that we're doing, we have a group that we're calling the Land Stewardship Working Group. And if you want to send me an email, we're hoping to have a meeting in July. And we want to start workshopping how we kind of do some of those solutions for our region. So if you're in Tampa Bay or you work in Tampa Bay, we're looking to eventually have some best practices or recommendations for our region around land stewardship, so maybe land use, but also building design. What are some best practices around sustainable and resilient buildings? So thank you, and please feel free to reach out to me, and I am going to hand it over to Christian now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kara and Brian. Wow, you guys are doing an incredible amount of work. I was taking notes, being like, I think we're doing that too, but maybe it looks a little different. Certainly excited to share with you guys what Miami-Dade County has been working on. So I'll go ahead and share my screen, and I have a number of slides. I probably won't get through them all, but I wanted to make sure I had plenty of content for folks to go back and review when they get the time. So my name is Christian Kamrath. I'm a resilience program manager with the Miami-Dade County Office of Resilience. And I'm here going to talk about some of our sea level rise adaptation initiatives, but also some other coastal storm risk or hurricane risk studies that are ongoing. So I just want to put a little bit of a context. This is a bit more about Miami-Dade County. We have 34 municipalities, so in some ways we sort of act as a regional entity, but we also have 1 million folks who live in unincorporated Miami-Dade. Of course, we've got 2 national parks, and we're part of one of the world's largest water control systems, the Central and Southern Florida flood control project. These are the different teams within the Office of Resilience shown on the bottom. I help lead our adaptation team, but we've got some great folks in our Office of Resilience working with our departments and all the partners in the county throughout the year. So we have, a various plans and strategies that sort of serve as the framework for our work. I'm partly responsible for implementing the Miami-Dade County sea level rise strategy, the second one listed here. But inevitably, they tie into and relate to some of these others that our office is working to implement. I just want to call out our sort of historical landscape in the context of our county and how, just over 120 years ago or so, we had the Everglades system extending, very far east into what is now the urbanized area. And we had, just thousands of acres of wetlands and sloughs, and actual naturally flowing rivers that emptied out into Biscayne Bay. Of course, now large parts of that have been drained, and in those low-lying sloughs, we now have channelized canals and all of these different structures managed by the South Florida Water Management District, which are the primary canal system. And that's where a lot of our compound flood risk resides now, where the stormwater and the coastal storm surge risk exacerbated by sea level rise get worse. So some recent news articles from the Washington Post and Miami Herald have been highlighting how we've seen a slight acceleration of sea level rise just in the last 20 or 30 years. So, while there's been about 14 inches in Miami in the last 100 years, about 6 of those inches have occurred on average since 2010. So that's pretty dramatic. And this is what, high tide flooding looks like on one of those canals. This is the Little River area, several, more than a mile inland. So it's already overtopping some banks and having an effect on underground infrastructure. And, our county, we use the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact unified sea level rise projections, some of those same scenarios that you saw earlier. We are looking at those same scenarios, and we use the NOAA intermediate high for a large majority of our planning efforts. And that shows us we are expecting about 2 feet in the next 40 years or so. But, based on our most recent understanding of science, which is evolving, we expect that to accelerate to some degree, depending on, how we and the rest of the world transition towards more renewable energy sources. So that's a big deal. A foot or two in Miami means a lot, given that we're only 6 or 7 feet above sea level on average. The map on the right shows where we have those high ground areas along the Atlantic Ridge. Going back to what Brian described, these used to be ancient reefs back when the state was underwater from a geological perspective. And now they serve as high ground where we have different communities living, and these lower areas in white and light blue that are the most vulnerable to a combination of effects. So that's because we have this pretty complex canal and pump system that's partially managed by the South Florida Water Management District. The county is in charge of these secondary canals. And then we have the county and municipalities who help, manage the neighborhood scale drainage infrastructure, whether it's French drains, stormwater pumps, retention areas, that kind of thing. But of course, our geology being so porous, means that groundwater and rising sea levels are affecting the levels in the canal system and causing a stress on this overall water management system that's meant to keep parts of our county dry when we get rainfall. So we know that sea level rise is exacerbating all of these types of flooding, and it's not just along the coast. Very far inland, we see the sort of cascading effect of higher canal and sea level and groundwater levels that affect whether we can drain rainfall or stormwater off the land. So it really affects all of these infrastructure systems, and we're seeing those effects already. A huge piece of what we're concerned about, as others have described, is the increasing hurricane storm surge risk. I saw today NOAA put out their recent sort of seasonal forecast for the hurricane season, and it only takes one storm, right, for a community to feel these devastating impacts. And so we always have to be prepared every year. But we know the the Atlantic is heating up, and some of the conditions might mean we just have a busier hurricane season this year. So we've been witnessing the really devastating and unfortunate impacts of these storms from a hurricane perspective, but we also know we don't need a named storm to see significant and prolonged flooding in our community, whether it's just a heavy rainfall event or a non-tropical system that looks like a tropical system, but produces the same consequences of windy conditions and heavy rainfall that stresses our outdated but evolving stormwater systems. And of course, we know, having talked to folks, but also based on lots of research, that there are certain communities, certain population groups in our community that really feel this first and worst when it comes to shocks and stresses caused by natural hazards and climate change. So a lot of these considerations are what we spend additional time and resources on to make sure we're reaching everyone, engaging folks mentioned here in our planning processes. So our sea level rise strategy talks about 5 main adaptation approaches. This is one of the kind of the overarching vision that describes, really it depends where you are, even in Miami-Dade County, which combination of these approaches might make the most sense, both from a physical, geographic landscape perspective, but also, of course, what is the community's feeling and preferences for adapting to sea level rise, so and living with more water. So it could be building like the Keys, elevating up on stilts or raised foundations, elevating on fill, expanding greenways and blueways along our canals and shorelines, and our linear corridors, creating green and blue neighborhoods, a more distributed system to track and treat water where it falls, and then incentivizing density on high ground near transit as a more sustainable development pattern. So for county projects, we again use the Southeast Florida Climate Change Compact projections, and we basically, depending on the county project, which has a requirement that it accounts for sea level rise in its design, we'll look at the different curves, and depending on the criticality of the project, we'll select a more conservative or higher sea level rise scenario. So for those less critical projects, we'll usually assume the IPCC median or lower curve in green. For most of our projects, government facilities, certain critical facilities, we'll use the NOAA intermediate high. But for our most critical and highest sort of value county assets like a water treatment plant or others, we try to incorporate assumptions related to the NOAA high scenario, or at least have an incremental phased adaptation approach that gets us to dealing with these higher water levels in the decades to come. So the way this looks on like a fire station, for example, we ask our departments to consider how does sea level rise and future flood risk affect this at different scales, the site, access to the site, any buildings or facilities themselves, and then of course critical equipment like HVAC systems, backup generators, etc. So we try to get those incorporated. I'll skip over this example real quick, but it's just one way that an electric bus storage facility that's being newly developed within our county sort of documented these potential effects from storm surge, extreme precipitation, and sea level rise, and the design alternatives that were considered and ultimately recommended to help basically raise the elevation of certain project components to make sure it's resilient throughout the design life of the project. I want to quickly touch on one of our key planning mechanisms known as adaptation action area planning. This is a tool used throughout the state. It's a state developed planning mechanism through a mix of state agencies, but now sits with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection and the Resilient Florida program. So we'd use adaptation action areas to focus in on our watershed. The Cs on the right side represent different canals, canal basins within our watershed, and the C7 and C8, which we know as the Little River and Biscayne Canal, are two of our ongoing adaptation action areas where we're trying to collaborate with and build capacity, align relevant studies and data, and plan projects, and then ultimately develop adaptation plans that summarize the challenges and opportunities for potential funding. So this is a key way we implement our sea level rise strategy, is by working at a more manageable scale. Of course, but it is also important to develop sometimes those larger scale, like coastal resilience master plans, like Kara was talking about. And so the way we're kind of advancing this work is at a smaller sub watershed scale across jurisdictions. And so in the Biscayne Canal AAA, you see how it is a combination of unincorporated areas, as well as municipalities like North Miami, Biscayne Park, Miami Shores. And it's along these former sloughs of the Everglades and these channelized wetlands where we see some of the highest risks for compound flooding, but also water quality issues and vulnerable septic systems. So this is what the elevation map of that same AAA looks like. You can see areas in blue that are quite low compared to higher ground areas. And we have to look at the higher ground areas too, right? To be able to see, are there opportunities for green stormwater infrastructure or other solutions that can put less stress on the lowest spots. So we see those water levels rising at the mouth of the Biscayne Canal, and that's already affecting some of the drainage capacity of our stormwater systems. And it really just takes, a number of inches within a day or two, and we see this type of flooding that keeps people from leaving their home, and of course can cause other types of disruptions. Similarly, in Little River, we have a range of elevations across, just a couple miles, but also quite different impacts being felt by flooding, whether it's failed septic systems, lack of tree canopy, minor damage to homes or seawalls, and real disruptions to just everyday life. And that's really important that we tie in social economic factors like average net worth, which can range from 16,000 for a particular household up to 3 million within a household. And that really affects, what we'd call the adaptive capacity or ability of folks to respond to different types of flooding events or other climate change stressors. And you can see where that overlaps with our Black and Hispanic populations and those higher percentages of renters as well. So we have our menu of tools that we're trying to implement through projects and planning, as shown from our sea level rise strategy, and that will come together in an improvement plan for capital projects that looks across the adaptation action areas to do a mix of things that were mentioned. So I'll quickly mention we are also doing a flood vulnerability assessment for the state of Florida, looking at our critical assets. So that's a huge effort, given that we have thousands of critical assets. We're going to be trying to integrate that into our existing vulnerability viewer as well, and continue to tell the story about the different implementation grants we've been able to get over the last couple of years through the Resilient Florida program from FDEP. So we're working to update this map to show that a little bit better. And the last thing I'll mention, a really important project we're assisting and supporting is with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We have more studies and projects with the Army Corps, I think, than any other local government in the country. So we get a lot of love. And it's also a lot of layers and coordination. The Back Bay Coastal Storm Risk Management Study highlighted here is the one I want to mention for you all to kind of keep an eye on. We just had a new draft report issued 30 days ago. Today's actually the last day to comment on it, but it includes a new comprehensive study framework that talks about these 3 pillars to guide our future study with the Army Corps, and an initial set of recommended measures to deal with critical infrastructure, residential buildings by elevating them, and flood-proofing of non-residential buildings across 6 environmental justice communities in the county. And we're requesting from Congress the authorization of 2 new programs with the Army Corps, one focused on nature-based solution pilot projects, and another to learn more about what they call non-structural, which is just how do we flood-proof more complex buildings and help reduce risk to large critical infrastructure like hospitals. So that new study framework I mentioned is really taking a modeled after the comprehensive Everglades restoration partnership over the last 20 or so years. And we really are trying to work towards a potential vision for multiple lines of defense from hurricane storm surge. So really thinking as the hybrid reefs or existing coral reefs as our first line of defense, and working our way inland to reinforce our dune system, create living shorelines, rehydrate or improve the health of our mangroves and wetlands where needed, and continue to adapt on the hyperlocal scale buildings that are critical or that are residential. So these are the types of nature-based solutions that we're hoping we can explore through this new pilot program and work with our municipalities and huge host of experts across academia, government, nonprofit worlds, etc. So these are our principles of success to make sure we're evaluating not just economic benefits of these solutions, but also the environmental and social benefits, what the Corps calls comprehensive benefits. So they're learning on how to better do that, and we're excited to be partners to help kind of advance that knowledge. So here, you guys can refer back to these later. Last thing I'll mention is one of my favorite publications, not from the county, but from another group called Atmos, that I think is a really helpful and diverse set of perspectives talking about climate change and culture that I thought this group might really appreciate. So something I gained a lot of inspiration from and thought others might be interested. And I'll end with that and turn it back over to Becky and the team and help us facilitate this question and answer session. I feel like we got some good questions already, so thank you.
Thank you all. I appreciate that so much. And yes, we do have some questions, so I will try to get through as many as possible in the short time we have together. I see it's first question. I see a lot of studies on the problems. Are there 2 solutions to either raise the elevation or pump away water, which tends to just circulate the water? Does the city pay for roads and the owner pays for structures on the property? To the best of your knowledge, are mortgage insurance companies mandating changes to the loan or to loan insure properties?
I could start. There are a lot more than 2 solutions to the problem, I would say. So maybe Brian could maybe talk more about those 2 solutions, but there's also, buyouts, there's, seawalls and tidal flood barriers. There are, elevating the structure, but there's also elevating, potentially bringing in fill. Then, of course, the mitigation aspect of reducing the greenhouse gas emissions to slow the rise. And then those are just a few of the solutions. There are other solutions like increasing the stormwater capacity and some of the solutions that Christian mentioned as well. So I think there's a lot of solutions and you kind of have to tackle it from several angles. And I'm not aware that the mortgage companies are requiring anything or insurance, but those would be areas where you could get potentially discounts if you did elevate your structure. But I'm not aware of requirements to elevate your structure to maintain insurance.
Yeah, I just add that there are many solutions. I think we tend to look at different areas. Like some areas are just low and you're not going to be able to infrastructure your way out of it. Other areas, but through infrastructure, you can prolong some kind of lifestyle of living in a place. And some others are even like what Elevate TI program's trying to do is like completely change the geography. So, but that's situational. Treasure Island is a very concentrated, small community where they're able to, as a zone, potentially like do a mass project. Same thing with the Eckerd project. I think the roadways is gonna be a big issue for coastal communities going forward, and so we're gonna be submitting for an adaptation planning grant it starts with outreach and trying to make plans with communities to kind of work between expectations and infrastructure that they rely on, and then realities of like how long that's gonna last, maintenance costs, and like the business case for maintaining those infrastructures.
I am still muted. Can't answer your question when I'm muted. Here's another question. How are property values being affected? Are the high risk area being affected by zoning and the approval process based on financial risk?
I have seen only property values going up. I mean, the house got wiped out by Hurricane Ian. It's on a sandy beach, which historically would migrate, and with nothing on it, it's selling for more than $4 million in Fort Myers Beach. So I think Sanibel is also an interesting case to look at. Just go on realtor.com and see what things are selling for in Sanibel. Blank sites, houses that are raised, houses that are lower, houses that are gutted. Ian was a big event that gave us a window into that issue. So I think it's very interesting. I don't know, Christian, have you seen houses that
Yeah.
have not seen prices go down?
I was gonna add, I think that's generally what we've seen is property values, continue to go up. I know there was a big surge in the last few years, and it's sort of, I wouldn't say plateaued, but it is remarkable. I don't know that the true future flood risks, especially long term, is affecting or being integrated into those property appraisals and all that. So I would also mention, I mentioned, we have some high ground areas in Miami that are more than 10 feet above sea level. Areas like Little Haiti, parts of Overtown are historically Black and immigrant communities that are experiencing, what some might call a form of climate gentrification, where they're not at risk of flooding. And that's precisely why investors and others are buying up property, trying to amass it and redevelop it. So it's been looked at in some of the peer-reviewed research, and I think there are some signals of it, but I think it's also just a bigger question for all of us about, how do our investments or lack of investments or land use and policy overlays, how are those potentially affecting property values? And even in cases where we are pouring, resilience money into like septic to sewer conversion or elevating roads, like really making a neighborhood more resilient. I'm not sure we've quite fully understood what some of the potential unintended consequences of that might be, if especially for renters, when it's a more resilient neighborhood, it's a good location, and rents can go up, and the folks that we're trying to allow to stay in some form of naturally occurring affordable housing see rents go up and are displaced at the end of the day. So just some different factors we have to balance, and I'm curious about how others have seen like community land trusts or other mechanisms sort of work to stabilize communities as they get resilience sort of projects online.